Michael McGrath, Minister for Finance and Expenditure, Cork South Central TD. He joins me by phone. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
Thanks for taking the call. A bit of a headache on your hands now as to, a bit of a Sophie's choice. Who'll get it and who won't, and what will they get?
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, look, I think your texter there hit the nail on the head, really. I mean, we in this country, I think, showed great solidarity towards each other right through COVID for the last 18 months. And that really has stood to us exceptionally well. And now, as we hopefully, begin to exit from COVID, we certainly don't want to divide society in any way whatsoever. Having said that, I think that it is appropriate that there would be some recognition of people who went above and beyond. It is also the case that the government has been faced with claims lodged with the Workplace Relations Commission and then the Labour Court by the INMO, who represent nurses, and also by other unions representing other healthcare workers for 10 days additional leave as a recognition payment. So those claims were lodged, which means that the government has to respond and has to engage and has to come forward with some proposal to seek to address that issue and to resolve it. And last week the Labour Court made a recommendation asking that the government, as the employer, in this case it's the HSE, would bring forward proposals in the next number of weeks, in the autumn is how they described it. And so that's now what we are considering, and it is a very difficult issue because your texter there is spot on. I mean, we all remember the early days of the pandemic going down to the supermarket and retail workers, what they did, cleaners, prison officers, Gardaí, members of the Defence Forces, so on.
Yeah, well, you do have the army in there. You mentioned the shop workers. You have lorry and freight drivers, Gardaí, obviously, taxi drivers, people working in supermarkets. Like, the list is endless. I can accept that you're saying nurses want 10 days leave. They want 10 days leave, so maybe they could get a holiday, for God's sake. But what about everybody else?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I don't think anyone would begrudge the fact that those who were really on the front line in healthcare did face huge personal risk. I mean, in the very early days of this, we weren't entirely sure what we were dealing with, and thousands of nurses and doctors and other healthcare staff went to work, and they did put themselves in harm's way, and that is a reality that I think we all have to be really grateful for, that they were so professional and selfless in their approach. So I think most people accept that point, but there are many others across society who did go beyond the call of duty and who really kept the country going in what were really dark times. So the government now has to consider all of this and try to deal with it in a non-divisive way, and it does have the potential to open up divisions that really weren't there over the course of COVID. People did stick together and there was a lot of solidarity, and we just need to maintain that now.
But the people didn't create the divisiveness, though. It's the proposal created it.
Well, I think there's a lot of loose speculation as to what may or may not be planned. And look, I haven't got involved in that, but I do have a role in the department that I run in helping government now to come up with a solution here. And that's what I'm doing, working with my own team in the department, because we do have responsibility across the public service in particular. I mean, we don't control paying conditions generally in the private
but you
sector.
will create a situation whereby, and it was Micheál started that, and he's the one who said that he wanted to extend it beyond frontline staff. He said that, which could be potentially hundreds of thousands of other workers. But at the same time, while some people would get a bonus or a benefit or time off, others took pay cuts, which have not been reversed in the private sector. They must feel awful about hearing this.
Look, undoubtedly for so many people, their world has been turned upside down in the last year and a half, and we still have over 100,000 people who haven't got their job back. So I'm very conscious of the harsh reality that a lot of people are still facing as a result of COVID. Something that nobody in Ireland caused or contributed to, but we've paid a very high price for it at a human level, at a national level, with our public finances in our society and our economy, the impact on public services and so on. The difficulty, Neil, in trying to define frontline is that it does get complicated, and it does get difficult to decide exactly where the dividing line is between who is frontline.
Is that what you're trying to work out then, is it?
Well, of course, that issue is being examined as part of this, because if we seek to define that, you will quite understandably put a list of different occupations to me and say, is this person frontline, is that person frontline? And, sometimes it's a difficult judgment call. It might be a grey area where somebody's role involves, directly supporting the frontline staff. Somebody's role might involve dealing with the public on occasion, but not all the time. So it is difficult. So we just need to work our way through this.
Well, it's right down to wait staff who weren't vaccinated, who were serving customers, for instance, in restaurants or pub facilities. Anybody in the hospitality sector, for instance. Piers Doherty has said a €200 voucher for everybody in the country. Would that solve it?
That's one option, but then that does not give any extra recognition to the people who were really on the front line, particularly in healthcare. That would be a way of not having to separate people into different categories. But I suppose you have to bring this back to what are we trying to do here? And I think what we're trying to do here is to find a way of recognising people who genuinely did go beyond the call of duty and who took, personal risk, made huge sacrifices to keep the show on the road and to look after the rest of us. That's really what you're trying to do. But in defining that exactly gets very difficult. If you were to say it's healthcare only, then you will justifiably have, members of the defence forces and prison officers on within the public sector and many others in the public sector, and then you will put the arguments to me about those in the private sector who were definitely on the front line as well. So it's not an easy one, Neil.
How much would it cost you? Did you mention a figure last week of $1 billion?
Well, the figure I put on the record last week was the cost of meeting the claim that has been lodged. The claim that has been lodged is for healthcare staff.
That's just $1 billion for the 10 days.
No, just to be clear. So it's a minimum of 377 million for healthcare staff to get 10 days. But because you'd almost certainly have to pay overtime or bring in agency staff to provide the cover, you're looking at over $500 million. But the truth is that many healthcare staff will tell you, and I've no doubt some will text you now and say that they can't take the leave that they're already entitled to. And so there is that practical reality as well, that many of these services are under pressure. Waiting lists have grown as a result of COVID, and so the capacity to actually grant this leave in the next number of months is, I think, quite limited. The €1 billion figure is if you were to apply 10 days leave right across the public sector, where all public sector workers would get it. But
all public sectors would get it, even though a lot of them worked from home.
No, this is what the cost would be.
Well, why would you give it to those that were working from home? That would be like, particularly as an example of that, the nightmare over passports, for instance.
Yeah, it is not being proposed, Neil, that there would be 10 days leave for every public servant. That is not being proposed, just to be clear on that. But these are illustrative figures to give you a sense of the cost involved of...
Do you see it from the private sector? I mean, you were in private sector for a lot of your life. The private sector are voiceless. They don't have any union powers, or they don't have any representative bodies as such to fight their corner.
Well, the unions do have a strong presence in large parts of the private sector, but the issue here is that the government has been faced with claims. They're not paid claims, they're claims for annual leave from the health sector, and over the weekend we've seen other parts of the public sector also say that they will be looking for similar treatment. So I just think we have to take a mature and calm and responsible approach to dealing with this. We believe that recognition is warranted.
Yeah,
I think there are...
Let me just reiterate here, because I just want to be clear what you're saying. You couldn't give a bonus or extra time off to public sector workers working from home. I just want to be clear about this. While private sector workers took pay cuts, you couldn't.
Well, the tools that we have to control rewards for private sector workers are much more limited. So the idea of a public holiday or National Day of Remembrance is one way, for example, where private sector workers would benefit, though I know a lot of people work on a bank holiday, but they would be entitled to some compensation or time off in lieu if they were to do that. So we have to examine what are the options available to us to treat people equally. But I think it does come back to answering the basic question, what are we trying to achieve here? And I think what we're trying to achieve is some recognition. It's not a reward, it's not compensation. You couldn't compensate people for the work that they did. Those who were really on the front line and the risks they took, with in some cases inadequate PPE, overcrowded hospitals, people looking after people who were dying in critical care, people in nursing homes, Neil, working in nursing homes where a huge number of the fatalities.
I acknowledge 100%. I heard the stories. I heard the stories of the postmen and women who were calling to people living on their own, doing their shopping, just checking in on them, standing 6 feet away from them for 15 minutes just for the sake of talking to someone.
Exactly.
That's frontline to me.
Even since, it is frontline, of course. Even since this debate kicked off, I'm looking at my own inbox and the messages coming in, and there's no consensus. There is no consensus. There are very different views being offered as to what should be done, and I think you'll probably see that coming into your own text line there as well. So, look, it's a difficult issue, but we're committed to bringing forward a proposal in the next number of weeks, which aims to be as fair as we possibly can be, to avoid division in society, but also to make an effort to recognise the people who genuinely did put themselves, at risk and went beyond the call of duty. So it's not an easy one, but we will have a proposal in the next few weeks.
Neil Prendeville, the voice of Cork, weekdays 9 to 12, Cork's Red FM.